seeing us in Restream. If it didn't work. But yeah, I don't know. Mike, I don't know if you're in here, but it says that your mic is not connected.
Perfect.
Just so you know.
All right, we are live.
There it is.
Excellent.
Hey.
All right.
Hello.
Yes, hello. My name is Chris Castaldi. I'm a technical director at 3 Pound XR, and I'm joined by Bryce.
Hello.
We're here to talk about GroKit Core and get you all ready for our at-home hackathon, get you started, get you excited, and talk about its features. We're going to go through a very short presentation, then I'm going to show you how I import the project, how to use some of the base features, and then Bryce is going to do a live demo showing how everything works.
Maybe not everything, but we'll get close.
All right, so we're starting with GroKit Core. As we said, we're part of 3 Pound XR. Been spatial computing for a very long time, but you're here to learn about GroKit Core. We are a Unity-based platform for building spatial computing applications and other applications as well. You can make some PC applications with it as well. But our big thing is making prototyping, building, and producing faster. So our big features is we have custom inspectors. We have beautiful descriptions and drop downs and property drawers and all sorts of things to make it easier for you to find things. Buttons, which we'll show you, are wonderful. We're based upon Unity events, which allows for really good debugging and robust quickly adding and subtracting things. You can test something really quickly and be like, that didn't work, and move on to the next thing. We also are ready for mixed reality and hand tracking. So we have drag and drop rigs, and I'll actually show you how easy it is. Basically, you drag our rig in, and you have a fully hand tracked, ready to go with gestures. Ready to go right away. Our big feature is what we call activators, and these are conceptually like after you do an interaction, you want it to do something. So, for example, like a light switch, it can be flipped on or off. And Bryce is going to go into much more detail of how these work, but basically they have an on and an off, and there's all sorts that you can do this: doors, light switches, just opening a menu, closing a menu, something entering a trigger, something leaving a trigger. There's all sorts of great things that you can do. We have inward and outward, and inward is basically for the prefab, and outward is for the reaching out and talk to something. Again, Bryce is going to go over these, and he has a great tutorial set up for you guys. As for common components, we're just going to go over a few. There is a lot of components, and it's all the documentation, which I'll show off as well. But we have triggers and our system called Item ID, which basically you can, instead of using tags like you used to, you just do drop down or compare strings, and then you can have triggers react to each things. We have a lot of debugging tools. We have our fast system, which I'll go over, and the debug color changer, which Bryce loves to pieces, and a bunch of shortcut windows like our little tool helper. And then we have a lot of things for timers. So starting and stopping times a specific thing. You want to make a bullet, something that fires a bunch of bullets really quickly. You can add a timer to start the sequence, or you can stop the sequence. There's all sorts of things you can do that way. We also have what we affectionately call do things. And do things is how you get stuff done. So very specifically, we have following and fake parenting. So if you want an object, a cute little character to follow you around, or something to like always be in your peripheral as you're working with it, that's what that's for. We also have a fake parenting system, which means something will act like it's parented in Unity, but not actually parent. Same goes for rotation, moving, tweening. All these are set up and ready to go. You do not have to write another rotate script, which is great. And another big thing is we have a pooled audio system. So it uses Unity's default audio system, but we have it pooled and complete control and debugging features of both sound effects and looped audio. So you can make music players and all sorts of stuff like that, which is really great. As for the XR features, we very specifically have hand tracking and gesture input. We call it our input XR event, And rather than you having to figure out like getting gestures, we have some hard coded gestures in there and 5 slots for custom gestures. And all these gestures will work with the network module, which is kind of exciting when we get there. We specifically have some gestures that we have set up. We call them our universal gestures. For example, it's always difficult for you tell someone to grab something and they'll either do this, they'll do this, they'll do this, they'll do this, and all these are different things, and it'll get both at the same time, which is what we're looking for. We're also compatible complete with with Meta's building block system they just added. So the rigs are a Meta building block and are completely compatible, and you can use their whole interaction system if you want to. Our big goal is to be kind of platform agnostic. Just add a few components to any of the rigs that exist. You can use our entire system. And one of those components is the XR hands. So XR hands are basically triggers you put at the end of everyone's hand, and it'll help with our built-in grab system. It'll help detect like triggers if you put your hands into things, and you can adjust it to a specific size. So no longer worrying about like, hey, the person's hand is the wrong size. You can adjust that trigger exactly the way that you want it. And lastly, we have our XR grab objects, which we call the GroKit XR grab object. And that is it's not very robust, but it's nice and extendable. It's only about 100 lines, and you can pick up an object and move it around. And if you want to change it, you want to adjust it, feel free. And it's completely networked. We're trying to make things nice and easy to modify. Yeah, I think that's it. Here's some more information about us. If you want to access our emails or talk to Robin, we have a QR code right there. Then I'm going to show you some of the importing process and the documentation. Is there any questions in the chat yet, Bryce?
Nothing so far. I think, I think we're ready to see
Excellent.
how easy it is to just add GroKit Core to a fresh
right.
project. It's
So,
the best thing about the hackathon is that most people, well, everyone, will be having nice fresh projects. So we don't have to worry about any compatibility issues. No one has to worry about if it works with something, even though it does.
Exactly. So to start with is you have your welcome beta user. You're going to want to go to your GroKit Core link, and this is going to really get started here. You can download GroKit Core here, which will bring you to this page. And we have a prepared project that's Yorks in 2022. We have a package for you to go use if you want to. And we also have a version working in Unity 6. But we have found, use at your own risk for the moment, Meta and Unity 6 are currently kind of at odds with each other, but it works. And I'll show you it works. I have a version up and running. We also have additional modules and integrations, which I'm not going to go over here, but all of it is in the documentation right there. Second is we have the documentation button, which will bring you directly to our documentation. And this Control K can search through, and you can get access to, let me actually go to the site here. There we go. So you can use Control K to search through the entire documentation nicely, and we have everything all categorized here. Specifically, documentation is right in this section, and this is where you can learn about all the components that we have set up. Overriding, scripting, extending, all of that's set up here. You can also learn about our additional modules and where'd they go? I lost you. Come back. I had you a second ago. Our additional modules are in here as well. We also have our XR system, which we talked about for hand gestures and input. Lastly, here, you do have access to our AI assistants. And just something, we have 2 AI assistants. We have a GroKit Core expert who's trained on all of our documentation. And we have one that is trained on Unity. And of course, I don't have that one open. Nope, I don't. But we also have a Unity expert, and that one's trained on Unity, NGO, and all that sort of stuff as well, which saves us a lot of time. You get 10 chats per day when you're chatting with it, so feel free to go use this. And it's been quite fun even for me to extend my own code. So that comes with free with GroKit Core. So I've already downloaded the project, and let me get here for you. We'll use the Unity 6 one. And download the project and import it. So we're not going to have to sit and wait for the import. We just have to sit and wait for the load.
Which is so much faster.
It's so much faster than
I love it.
I do want to mention if this pop-up shows up, they just landed this on us. For now, we're going to keep using open hands. We already have a plan to move this over, but this is what we got for the moment. So just
Oh,
click
and
that button.
I just see
Mhm.
Ian in chat mentioned that Meta and Unity 6 do not play well together. Luckily,
Yes.
GroKit Core does. So yeah, if
Yes.
you're not in Unity 6, that's okay.
Yes.
GroKit Core still works, and when you upgrade to Unity 6, eventually, once Meta and Unity 6 do play a little bit nicer um, together, that it will be seamless on the GroKit side. Can't say the same for the Meta side, but on the GroKit side, it you should be able to just go right into Unity 6, no problem. So you don't have to start in Unity 6 in case other people were wondering.
Yes. That's why we gave all the versions to go and play with.
Hmm.
Bryce will be doing it in Unity
I'm going to be in
2022. So
2022. I'm old
yeah, that's
school.
right. Old school indeed. But yes, if this pops up, you want to make sure you use keep existing. We'll be fixing that soon. You got to redo a whole skeleton for it, but we're good to go there. The first thing you're going to want to do is go to your GroKit Core hub and grab your authentication, which I need to grab my API key, which is here somewhere. It's fine. I'll be reusing it anyways, so we'll go from there. But you want to do that. If you don't do that, currently all of your inspectors are going to be deactivated. And perfect. And there's my authentication. So we're good to go. And then all the inspectors are unlocked. And let's go with some of the basic things we have here. We have our grow blocks window, which contains all these custom ready to go blocks. One of the big ones you might end up using. Bryce is going to go over this again, but we have the player objects, player triggers, all sorts of stuff like that, which are nice and easy to use. We also have our environments that we access to. We also have our GroKit helper window, and this is accessed by going to GroKit Core helper window, and you can dock him wherever you want, but it contains a lot of very useful features, as well as a direct link to the documentation, a link to log into your account, and a help button if you are just your panic button if you don't know what to do. This will go through every single thing that this one does and help you through the documentation specifically. Um, one of my favorite features that it has is, you can just click and I can create a cube right there. He's ready to go. I can over here create a sphere, and over there I can create a text mesh pro. Yeah, we'll import you later.
Classic.
It's a brand new project,
Love it.
so that's what I can do. But yeah.
So we have a quick question about, and this is actually probably a pretty good segue to the
Mm-hmm.
XR rig prefab. They were
Yes.
asking, does the GroKit XR rig prefab have both hand and controller interaction? And if not, can you just add one or the other through via the
Yes.
building
So
block?
I was actually getting there
I
specifically.
know. Sorry,
So
I
yeah,
wanted
it's
to
okay.
segue for you.
We have video on how to do this, but specifically, we do recommend you pick one to get started because if you're trying to do controller and hands, you're pick one. If you're going to do hands, stick with hands if possible. You can, of course, do both. We, however, have prefabs already set up. We have a controller and a hand only, and you can modify these to work with controller and hand. There's a little bit more involved because you have to switch the inputs, but it's not that difficult. And if you want to set up a support ticket, I'll show you how to do that. But if you just want to get started, you literally just double click this scene right here, and this is ready to go with an existing rig, input examples, grab objects, and little triggers to work on hand. So if my link is up and running, let's see, are you? It's a good question.
That's Link's secret. It's always running.
I know that's its secret, yes. Of course. Let's try another cable. Come in. Huh. You are not being a friend today. Well, the joy of a live demo. Okay. I will say, if you just, with this project, this is already set up to work with Oculus Link and ready to go, and you can just literally press play, and you will have access to your hands and your controller right here. Even as an XR movement, which is disabled, if you want to turn that on, then you have access to the rubber band or the drag world system, which is for moving around the space. We also have in our samples, we have fly through rings. This is a hand-tracked example where you basically fly through these rings using rubber band and hand tracking. So you do a middle pinch and you can fly around the world to get started. But yeah, these should be ready to go as these are not grow blocks. Ah, yes, they are grow blocks. Just did a change. So they should show up if you hit refresh database right here. They should show up under meta, and you can just add them to your scene. Any other questions?
Nothing yet.
All right. Are you ready for your demo, Bryce?
Ooh, I am ready.
Excellent. I will pass it off to you then.
Okay. And we're gonna do like more questions at the end too. So feel free to keep asking questions in chat. We're keeping an eye on those as they come in, but there will be also time at the end to dedicate to more in-depth questions if that's the case. Okay, let me get you off stream so that you can do whatever you need to do on camera.
There you go.
Here we go. Oh, there's my nice desktop. There's Unity. Okay, so what we're going to go through for this demo is kind of explaining the main use cases for GroKit Core and how to very quickly iterate, very quickly get functionality set up, testable, all that stuff. For situations like we just saw, where your headset might not be working. Well, that's okay, because you can set up a lot of different functionality and test it and have it function correctly just within the Unity editor, and then very, very easily just switch it over to XR components or network components, whatever you might need for your projects. So what we first like to talk about with GroKit Core is the inward and outward activator concept. So the way that we typically route things is through these activators. And a lot of times at first, in the beginning, I was one of these people as well. It felt like it was a little bit redundant. Like, okay, well, I'm setting up a bunch of this stuff just to have a door open. Like, that seems like a lot of work just for a simple door. But it's because I lacked confidence in myself. And when it turned out that the door actually worked really well and I really liked it, it was difficult to scale that because it wasn't routed properly. So once I realized, like, oh, now I have to go back and kind of make it like prefabable, if you will. If I had just done that from the start, it would have saved me a lot of time. So it's good to know about the inward and outward activators, how to route things in the event that you want to scale stuff. You want to do multiple things. You want to keep it expandable, keep it modular. That'll become clear, hopefully, as we go through this, why you might want to route those things through our activators. So the way that I like to approach any kind of GroKit Core integration into a concept or an idea or a project is to start with the goal that you want to achieve. So we're going to start super, super simple. Our goal right now will just be simply to turn a light on and off. So we're just going to be using set active, yes or no, to turn a light on and off, see what kind of functionality we can get from that. So the first thing that we would do is we would just create a light. So here's my point light. There it is. Turn up the intensity a little bit so that we can see it. And we'll make it a nice, pleasant green. So there it is. So let's say that we have some kind of functionality where if you step onto like a switch, then the green light will turn on, letting you know that you've done it correctly. Maybe there's 3 switches in front of you, and it could be a quiz and if you put your hand on the right switch, it turns the green light on. If you put it on an incorrect one, it turns a red light on. Or it could be some kind of puzzle that you've just solved, like a keypad, and you have to put in the right combination. And when you do, this light is like over top of a door, and this light turns green, and then the door opens. There's an infinite number of potential. But if we distill it all down to what is the end result, it's just simply, is the light on or off, or should it be on or off? So just simply toggling this light on and off, nice and easy. Now, we want to run this through an inward activator because the inward activators will control all of the functionality, all of the different things that we want an object to do within itself. So if we wanted this light to turn on, if we also wanted a sound to play, if we wanted the light to change color for some reason, all of that stuff is happening kind of internally inside its own hierarchy. So what I will usually do next is create kind of a container object. So I'm just going to create an empty object, and I'm just going to call this light mechanic container. Sometimes I use holder, sometimes I use container. I'm using container today because I feel like it, I guess. So I'm just going to parent the point light to that. And then again, if we wanted something else, if we had like an audio source, or if we had a mesh, some kind of sconce is the word I was looking for, because that's a fun word. If we had some kind of light sconce, we could put that in here as well. All contained under this one parent object. So now we get into the actual routing. On the parent object, I would add an inward activator, and in fact we can flex our helper window here. See, our helper window has add inward, add outward, so these are for our activators. So because we're adding activators inwards and outwards so often, having those as just a button in the GroKit helper is really nice. So if I just click add inward, it automatically adds an inward activator for me. But you can do it the traditional way and click add component, type inward, and we have an inward activator. So the inward activator itself, all that explanation to actually show you the inward activator now, here it is. So this has an on event and an off event. So when the inward activator is told to do its on event, we have some debug buttons here we can use for testing. It will just simply run all of the events in this list. And when we tell it to do its off event, it'll run all of the off events in the list. So in this case, if we want the light to start off, we could turn the light off here. And then in our inward activator, I can add an on event. I can drag my point light in, and I can tell the game object to set active to true. And then just for demonstration purposes, we'll turn the light back off. So now, super simple. I mean, this is really basic, but it's good to start with basics. I can use my debug buttons here just to see if this even works. So if my inward activator is told to do the on event, hey, look, the light turns on. And if it's told to do the off event, the light turns off.
Editor
Super
buttons
simple.
are everyone's favorite
And the
thing.
buttons are beautiful. Now, already we can hopefully start to see why this could be advantageous to us, because, as I said, if we wanted to start adding functionality to this, if we wanted to start adding also play a sound, also play a particle effect, also start an animation, also trigger some custom functionality that we've coded ourselves, some public function somewhere. All of that is just adding more and more to these. And you could have 500 events in your on event. The Unity editor might not like it, but you could. And you're still only ever telling this inward activator to just do its on event, and it'll go through all of those things. So once you have your inward activator started, doesn't even have to be complete yet, just as long as we have something in here that shows us that the functionality is working, we can start to work backwards through our mechanics. So if the goal was turn the light on, we've got that. That's easy, done. So now we take one step back through our mechanics and say, okay, well, how are we going to tell this inward activator to do its on or off event? Basically, what's going to trigger this? And I use the word trigger because I like to use our item ID trigger system to demonstrate this. So let's just simply say We'll use a scenario. Let's say that this is like an automatic door or something like that, or like maybe even an airlock where you step into it and when you trigger a motion detector, it says, "Hey, you're here. You're in the correct zone." The green light turns on. So we'll start with just a simple trigger. We'll just simply say, if the player, in this case, it won't look like a player, but we're going to pretend it's a player. If the player moves into a certain area, this green light will turn on. So the easiest way to do that, if we come to the GroKit Core menu up here, we have our Grow Blocks menu. And I always like to start with an item ID trigger right here. And if we click on this, we can see what this does. An item ID trigger just simply runs an on and off event based on trigger enter and trigger exit. So if something enters our item ID trigger with the correct tag, then it will run the on event. And if something exits, if we want it to, the item ID trigger with the correct tag, it will run the off event. So I'm going to add this to our scene. There it is. And then I'm also going to do a debug grab with item ID. So this is just nice for testing. It's an object that already has collision set up. It already has an item ID set up. It's already grabbable. So if you're already in your headset in Link and hitting play and testing things, it's also ready for you to grab and move around. So I'll add that to the scene as well. So here is my grab object. I'm just going to pretend this is the player for now. And I'll move it manually. And then we have our item ID trigger. So this is the area that we need to step into to make this work. So I'm going to back these up a little bit. And you can see what's nice with the bro blocks, that we should use that at some point. Not yet, but one day.
That'd be great.
A nice thing about the grow blocks is you can see that we already have some additional visual elements just to help us sort these things out. So we can see where the trigger zone is being affected. We can see that we just have a nice mesh for our debug grab object. What's nice about these is we've categorized them, so if you wanted to change the visual here, all you have to do is turn the cube off and drag and drop some other visual here, and it's a completely custom object at that point. The grabbing still works because the grabbing is based off of the collider on the parent object, so you can swap the visuals to whatever you want them to be, and this will still work exactly as it will now. Item ID trigger. If we look, our item ID trigger has an outward activator. So as we were talking about with the inward activators, influencing themselves, so our light inward activator is influencing everything contained within it. An outward activator should influence other things, not itself. So on this outward activator, we wouldn't want to put anything like changing the visuals of our item ID trigger itself. Anything internal would be an inward activator. So this outward activator is specifically going to reference other objects. And typically, outward activators should just reference other inward activators. Now, this is where it starts to get a little bit like, okay, it might start to seem like, why do we have to tell this to do? Why can't I just tell this outward activator to turn the light on? And I will explain why in a bit. But the short answer is because if you start to scale this, or if you start to have multiple things that you want it to do, or multiple inward activators you want it to affect, you're going to be doing a lot more clicking than you need to. So, super simple. This item ID trigger is simply going to tell our light inward activator to run its on event or off event, depending on if we have triggered this or exited the trigger. So on our outward activator here, I can just add in my on event, I can tell my light mechanic containers inward activator to run its on event, and I can also tell it to run its off event. So working through this functionality, what we have internally is this item ID trigger script. This handles all of the actual trigger enter, trigger exit, collision information, all that kind of stuff. So as you can see in our item ID trigger, it's asking for an outward activator, which we have given it. So what this means is when the correct item enters this ID, this item ID trigger, it will trigger the on event of our outward activator here. And if the item leaves the trigger, it will trigger the off event of our outward activator. So we're using the trigger to trigger the on and off event of our outward activator, which we are also using to trigger the on and off event of our inward activator. So if I just simply play this, I didn't set up my tags, but they should default to any, which means this should just work. We will see. So if I move my object, pretend that I grabbed this with my hand and I'm picking it up and I'm putting it down, and the light turns on. And then if I leave, the light turns back off. Simple as that. Now, thinking about how this is routed, where we have an outward activator that's triggering a bunch of stuff. If, let's say, I wanted to turn on 20 lights, if I was just simply telling each light to turn on manually in my outward activator of my item ID trigger, if I was just to say, get rid of these and say, okay, point light, and then game object set active to true. If I wanted 20 lights, I would have to do this 20 times. Too much. Especially, if we get into the astronomical numbers, millions. Now, in the same way, if I had to do this, if I had to set inward activator on event and I wanted 20 lights, well, I would have to do 20 of those as well. It would be less work if this had 4 or 5 things. If I was turning on a light and turning on an audio source and playing a particle effect, then I would have to do 3 events here for each one light that I had. So if I did 20 of those, right, that'd be 60 events alone. So this reduces it. In this case, if I had 20 lights, then I would have 20 events here. That's still too much clicking. So that's why we also added this inward activator slot. So our outward activators have an inward activator slot to directly correspond the on and off events and sync them between the outward and the inward. So if I drag this, my light mechanic container's inward activator into this slot and hit play, you'll see that when I tell this to do its on or off events, or if I activate the trigger, you see it still works. Sometimes I get sick of dragging the items around, so I click the do on and off events just as a shortcut, because again, buttons are beautiful, but we can do this too. Still works. What's nice about this is, if I take this light mechanic container and I duplicate it a bunch, we're getting wild here. How many we have? We have like 19, 20, no, 15, 16-ish. So now I have all these light containers, and I want them all to correspond here. Well, that's why we have our extra activator slot. So what we do is, this is like a little Unity shortcut. If you ever need to add, drag multiple items from your hierarchy into a list, all you have to do is just click this little lock button at the top here to lock the inspector on the object that you want to drag everything to. And then we can just select all of these objects and just simply drag them on. So now, let me unlock this because I always forget to unlock the inspector after I've locked it, and then I get very confused. So now what should happen is I should be able to drag my object, should still trigger. But now all the lights turn on. We can see all 16 of them have turned on. So what's nice about this is you can scale this, just until you break Unity, essentially, because we're routing everything through this one outward activator. It's just simply when this thing is told to do its thing, it goes. Everything's here, everything works. So what's nice about this is this outward activator's activation could change. Right now, it's activating itself based on our item ID trigger. But if we simply wanted this outward activator to fire after a certain amount of time, we could do that. So let's do that. Let's add that real quick. I'm just going to add, and sometimes this is maybe a good question for Cordelia. Maybe we could talk about this tomorrow when Cordelia and I do our live build using GroKit Core to make some really fun interactive game stuff. But sometimes I'll add just an object like to let me know like this is my timer object. But you don't have to. You could just add this as a component. But I'll do it as a separate object just to reinforce the routing and stuff. So let's say that I had, we'll do like a countdown. No, we'll do a base time. Because looped timer is also good, but we'll just do this. So I can have this timer, this base timer event that we have. I can just have this countdown, and when it's done, I can just tell the item ID triggers outward activator to run its on event. The current interval is 1, so it'll take 1 second to count down, or count up, sorry. And then I'm going to set is active to true so that it just starts. So if I hit play, what should happen is this should count up to 1. When it completes, it should fire my item ID trigger, and then all my lights should turn on. There we go. So another reason I think that demonstrates that you should route through outward and inward activators. Because if everything is going through an outward activator that's kind of coordinating what turns on and what turns off, then the method that you use to activate it is completely modular. So you can activate it in any way you want, as long as you know, if you think about it like bottlenecks. This outward activator, any functionality that it's going to do is all bottlenecked through this do on and do off, which then expands out into our 16 different light objects. But then we bottleneck back in to our inward activator, and now we know with confidence that anything we add to our inward activator will also be triggered. So this is a great kind of segue into talking about prefabs. So what I should do is I should prefab this light mechanic container. So I'm going to do that. And then I'm just going to hook it back up because it will have lost all of my references. So I'm just going to put this back. And I'm going to duplicate these again. This time we'll just do 12. 9. We'll do 9. So I will drag all of these back in just like I did before. So the advantage here now, make sure it still works. Got to make sure it works. And we'll count 1 second. Boom, they're on. So now what's nice is I can come to my light mechanic container and I could do something like I could add an event for something like an FX spawner. So our FX spawner component is nice because it will instantiate a prefab, and then after the death time elapses, which is it's a very permanent sounding variable name. Once the death time elapses, it will go away. So if any of you have ever been in the situation where you finally get some particle effects spawning, from your hit detection or whatever, and you're like, cool, this is great, and then you look at your hierarchy and you just see a bunch of particle systems that are still lingering, this will be very handy. So it's nice that it cleans itself up. So we have some pre-made particle stuff in our folders. So in the GroKit folder, there is a I just had it up. We have a particles folder. I knew it was under. Okay, so core assets. Sorry, I didn't go deep enough. So in our core assets, we have our sample particles that Alyssa made. They're amazing. So what I will do, nope, not on my timer object, on my light. I'm just going to do, we'll do confetti. Confetti's fun. So I have an FX spawner. It will spawn this confetti prefab. The confetti prefab will be destroyed after 1 second. So I am just going to simply put this in my on event, and I will tell the FX spawner to spawn on self. So if we hit play, we can test this. Now it's only going to happen on one of them. I haven't applied the prefab yet, but oh, we couldn't see it. It was there. I made a mistake. I did it with the other. I did it with a timer, which is kind of pointless technically, but I didn't do it with the thing that actually mattered. So I should have created an empty game object and call this my FX spawn or FX spawner, whatever we wanted to call it. And then that's where my actual FX spawner should go with my confetti. There it is. So that I can specifically tell it where it needs to spawn. Okay. Let's try that again. Boom, boom, spawn on self. Okay. And maybe I'll get a little closer too so we can actually see it. I'm going to do it again just so we can see it. Boom. See, we got a little confetti down there. I actually don't have effects turned on here. There it is. I was doing this so that I could have a nice, let's get rid of the skybox. There we go. Confetti. Woo! Now it's only doing it on one, but
Yay.
again, prefabs, we love them. So all I have to do is just apply this to my prefab. And now when I play it, all the lights should confetti. Ta-da! So, because these are using an inward activator, I can add any functionality that I want inside here, tell it to run on the on or on the off, and then just simply apply it. And I know this is a self-contained thing. I know this works. I know that this, all it needs to do is it just needs to be told when to do on or do off, and everything will work beautifully. Then I have my outward activator, which is communicating to all of the correct objects that it needs to communicate to. It's telling everything what it needs to do. It's coordinating. But all it ever needs to be told is either do on or do off. So then it's just a matter of what is telling it to do its on or off. Again, in this case, it was the item ID trigger, but it's now also this timer. Another fun thing that we could do with a timer would be something like, instead of setting these point lights on and off directly, we could add another timer here. So I'll get rid of the set active on and off, and instead I will simply tell my timer to turn the object on or off. And in fact, we don't even need an event for this because we can just have this start as active. But we'll have an event that'll tell it to start. So I'm going to use a random interval between 1 and 1.5 might be fun. And on complete, we are just simply going to turn my light on. Oop, nope. Is that active? Oh, actually, you know what? Even better. Even better way that we could route this. Let me leave those events, those on and off events there. All this has to do is just run the inward activator. Oop, oop, oop. Boom. Inward activator. On event. So between 1 and 1.5 seconds, this timer will then activate the inward activator, which will then turn the light on and turn on the confetti. So let's give that a shot. Let's see what that does. Oh, we saw the delay there. I forgot to turn the timer off for this one. So let's have this not be active. And while we're here, might as well apply the prefib. So what we should see is we should see all these lights turn on and off and the confetti burst, but not all at the same time. There we go. A little sporadic. So I can increase the gap between this, so it could do between like 1 and 2 seconds. Apply that. And then wait for it to load. Boom, 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 boom. There they go. All random. Now, because this is starting active, these are automatically firing, but if I turn off is active on my timer and apply that, now these won't run at all. So instead, I could start switching around my routing. So if I wanted to run the inward activator here, and I wanted the inward activator to activate the timer, and then I wanted the timer to run these events, we could do that. So that's super easy because I can just copy and paste. So I'll just copy and paste down here. So I'm rerouting. So now this inward activator is simply telling the timer to start. Then the timer is handling turning the point light on and the FX spawner. Now, it's important to note, even though I completely rerouted everything in here, even though I added functionality, I changed where the functionality was happening, how it was working, notice all I have to do still is just tell my inward activator to do on or off. So if I come back to my timer on my item ID trigger, in fact, we'll remove this completely. We'll just use our old school triggers. I don't have to change anything here. The outward activator is already set up. The outward activator is telling the inward activators to run on or off. So I don't have to change anything. Make sure that I applied that. I did. So my inward activator is now telling my timer event to start. My timer event will then randomly pick an interval. It will then activate my point light and spawn my particle effect as soon as my cube touches it. So my cube will touch it, everything starts to tick, now it starts to go off. If we wanted this to feel a little bit more instant, we could set the interval between 0 and 1 instead of 1 and 2, so that it happens as soon as the collision occurs. Let's see how that works. Boom, there we go. So, speaking of expanding functionality, I'm just going to come in here, I'm just going to reset this so we just have our one light mechanic container. Let's say that this changes. Let's say that this, I don't want it to be a random interval anymore. I want it to just simply turn on. Well, again, I can just reroute. I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to paste it here. I'm just going to get rid of my base timer. I'm essentially back to square one. My point light turns on and off. My FX spawner spawns some confetti. But let's change this mechanic. I don't want it to be a light. I want it to be a door. So this is now my door mechanic container. I'm going to create a empty object, and this will be my door pivot, because I'm creating the object directly in Unity, so I want the pivot to be a little bit off because we're going to have the door rotate open. And then inside this, I'm just going to make a quick cube, and we'll call this door visual. And I can use, well, here, let me set it up so that it looks correct first. Do something like this. Squeeze it in, make it a little bit taller so that we can see it. Something like that. And I'm just checking it against my pivot so that my pivot, so that the door swings based on the pivot. So usually what I'll do is I'll set the pivot to center, like world center, and then adjust the position of the door. And then once the door is lined up, I'll just move the pivot over so that it's back to the middle. So essentially we want our door just to swing open and swing closed. And let's make sure that our light still looks good. does not. Put in front of the door. There we go. So we can see it turn on, and then the door will swing open. Okay, so I have my door pivot. So this is the thing that I want to rotate. And we have a component for that. Do rotational movement. So I just want to make a point here. We have do rotation. Do rotation is more constant, whereas do rotation movement is more to a specific rotation, like open to a point or open by a certain amount and then stop. So do rotational movement here. Object to rotate in this case is itself. If it wasn't itself, you can slot a different transform in there and it'll work. But if you leave this as none, it'll just reference itself. Is local. I'll just check that to true, just in case. Even though it's world up, so it shouldn't matter. But and we can see I want my y-axis to rotate, so I'm gonna put this at like 80, -80, so that it opens. So in our do rotational movement, we also have the amount of time it will take to complete the rotation, and then we also have a curve. We'll play around with that a little bit later. So back up to our inward activator. Now I just simply need to tell this to do its rotation. So I'll drag my door pivot in, do rotational movement, and you can see we have a bunch of different functions for this. I simply want it to rotate 2 in the Y, and we said -80. Now again, use these debug buttons because something might break somewhere else and you want to know which thing broke. So if I were to hit play and maybe I moved one of my triggers or something like that, or I disconnected an outward activator in all the confusion and I don't know, and I try and move my grab object into the trigger and the door doesn't rotate. Well, it could be that I set the rotation up wrong, or it could be that something else broke. So easiest way to see this is to just run the on event with the debug event. So let's see. There it goes. Plays confetti, opens up.
Nice.
Notice I can click this. It'll keep turning this on. It'll keep spawning confetti, and it'll keep rotating to -80 degrees. This is why I used rotate to and not rotate by. If it was rotate by and I kept triggering this, the door would keep rotating more and more and more. And because it's not a 90-degree rotation, it'll keep getting like offset more and more and more, so that when you try and return it to closed, it just won't look right. Okay, so now we have our door. Our door light turns on, our confetti still spawns, and our door opens to -80 in the Y. So now we can test to see if our cube still triggers properly and if everything else works. Oops, there we go. And we'll move that, and boom, there we go. We know it works. Now in this case, this would be like a door that you unlock like permanently. Like in this case, when you enter it, the door opens, but when you leave it, the door doesn't like go shut, because as soon as you leave here, it would shut right in your face. There'd be no point. But we could run an off event if this were something like a pressure switch or something, and you push this cube onto the trigger, and then if you push it off again, then we could have the door shut. That would work too. Okay, so let's talk about our, we were going to talk just really quickly about this rotation. So this curve here is what you can use to make kind of fancier movements. So if I set my curve like something like that on our door rotation, you'll see that it'll open a little bit more cinematically, I guess you could say. So just run the on event. There we go. A little nicer. Okay, so on our item ID trigger, right now we know that the collision works, and the collision works because our item ID trigger component here is currently looking for any item ID it can find, any at all. So if we wanted to specify So again, working backward through our functionality, through our mechanics. Let's say we don't want just anything to open this door. We want something very specific to open this door. So let's set the item ID to cyan. Why not? Then we have our debug grab object, which has an item ID on it. So item ID trigger is looking for a cyan item ID, and our debug grab object has an item ID on it that we can set to cyan. So now this triggers the cyan switch, which opens the cyan door, let's call it. So we could very, very easily change these now, or update these. So I could just grab all these and I could duplicate them. And I have my second item ID trigger here. And I can come down to my visual, and instead of the cyan material on it, maybe I put, we'll do magenta. And then for this door, I'm going to set the point light to be magenta-ish. And then, well, I'll change the tag. Well, nah, we'll do this. I'll duplicate my grab object as well. And I'll set this item ID to magenta. So this grab object should trigger this door, but it should not trigger this door. So if I move this into the cyan, notice that we have our debug object change red if it's not the correct one. Again, you can turn the visual off if you don't want that. But look, it's not triggering it. It knows that there was a trigger, which is why we had it change color at all. It knows it's collided with something, so we know it's not broken. But it's not supposed to trigger this outward activator, so it isn't. But if I put it in the magenta one, oh no. How anticlimactic. This one, this item ID, I know exactly what I did. I put this to cyan. I didn't change this one to magenta. Man, that would have been so cool. Okay, anyway, so rewind. Look, it doesn't work here, but it does here. Hey, the last 10 seconds didn't happen. And we can tell it keeps working because it keeps spawning my confetti. Now, if I grab the cyan and move that into the magenta, it doesn't trigger it. But if I move it into cyan, it does. Now let me fix this before I do it again and forget. This should be magenta. Now, even just with this, you could have a lot of interesting functionality. When I was like making this demo before, I thought it'd be really cool. It'd be a really cool mechanic if you had one grab object, and we had a bunch of like paint, like a bunch of paint buckets, and you pick this object up with your hand and you would dip it in different colored paint, and then that would change this trigger to respond to different colors. So it would change the item ID based on the paint that you dipped it in, which would then activate a different door depending on what color it was currently. Now, I could, this is getting into, I won't get too far into this stuff. This is getting into like default Unity functionality stuff. But as we know, we could name this as like door mechanic container, like root or base. And then I could rename it to like cyan and then create a prefab variant and then call this one door mechanic container magenta and create a prefab variant so that they're all based off of the base door mechanic container because the only difference is their color is changing. Or the color that they're being triggered by is changing. So that then uses Unity's prefab variant system. Like I said, you could add a bunch of custom functionality, custom scripts, public functions, all that kind of stuff, and then just simply put it in your on and off events, and then it just goes. Okay, we wanted to leave some time. There's 13 minutes left in the event. We want to leave some time for questions. So, does anyone have any other questions? Anything about routing? Anything about functionality, documentation, any of that stuff. In fact, I'm going to pull up the helper window again. Oh, I was going to do a super cool thing, Chris, but these reset. I was going to be like, oh, and we'll make this one magenta, and I was going to have the primary magenta loaded in. But yeah, so what I'm talking about is this GroKit helper, we have these primary and secondary materials because sometimes, like when I created these doors, they just default to Unity's gray material. But you could put something in here. For example, if I just searched, I'm into magenta right now. Magenta, I could add this as my primary material, and then anything I click on that has these, I can just apply the primary material to them, and they automatically have it. So that's just nice. You know, for example, like if you've ever used ProBuilder, ProBuilder has a nice like a triplanar world-based grid material that looks really nice. So if you had some kind of like grid material or some kind of just default material that you'd prefer to the default Unity gray, you can just slot that here, and then as you create stuff, you can just apply that stuff to it, which is nice. I'm going back to chat to see. Yes, we are in America, indeed.
Yep. You know, Bryce, you could have
Yes.
added, using the activator helper window, you could have added and subtracted those events a lot faster.
Oh, yeah, yes. So, let's say that I wanted a bunch more off events here. Well, I
Mhm.
can set this as my current activator in the helper window. And then anytime I need to add an off event, I can just go ba 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 ba. And it adds a bunch. And you'll notice that it defaults to set active because that's one of the most common things. I mean, it might as well, when we create a new project, it might as well just create like 10 default objects with inward and outward activators that just
Be
turn
perfect.
themselves on and off, because that's most of like the start of all of the functionality for most mechanics is just start by turning the thing off. We'll make it look fancy later. That's why I started with
Yeah.
the light for the example, but with doors and stuff like that, um, you know, there are fancy things you can do with doors like rotation and movement and animations and all that kind of stuff. But if you start with just the door turns off, I can proceed through the door. That is good enough to set up your functionality, your routing, your triggers, make sure everything's working. That's play testable. You can do all that stuff. Then once you know that's doing what it's supposed to, you come in and you add the fancier stuff. So we've done that a million times with,
It's true. Millions of times.
I mean, a lot.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. If you want to show off the door prefabs that we
Oh,
have
there
already
are,
built
yeah.
in.
Speaking of doors, we
Mhm.
do have a door prefab here. So I'll actually just hide all these. So in the core assets folder, there's also just a doors prefab that you can drag in. These are some doors that we made. And then actually I'll leave this on and I'll just tag this as player. So this should now count. Unless Chris lied to me. Ah,
I
look at
would,
that. Never.
would never lie to
I
you,
always
Bryce.
trust you. So, uh, in this case, in our doors prefab, we have our door trigger, and we have a bunch of different kinds of doors. Right now, we have our door slide double. So this is like one of those automatic doors
Mhm.
in some sci-fi thing. Look at it go.
Yeah, and you just got to drag the inward activator into the trigger, and you're off you go.
Wouldn't you know? So if I turn this one off and I want to do vertical, let's say, again, it's just using an inward activator. Everything's controlled through it. And the door trigger is just using an outward activator. So all I have to
Yep.
do is swap the inward activator here with the one that I just turned on. And now watch this. Haha. Now it's a vertical sliding door. I don't want that. I want it to be like a hatch. So I just activate the hatch object. Again, just swap my inward activator with this door hatch. Move my object into range. Boom, hatch opens. Technically, I should be able to do this, right, Chris? Get real fancy with it. We'll put the
Do what?
rotate first, but then we'll put all the rest of them as the extra
You
activators,
can.
because who cares? They're off. So now I don't even have to swap my activators. I could just, whoops, no, I locked the
Yeah,
inspector.
someone wants to show how to add audio to that door, Bryce.
Oh.
How would you do that?
I would love to do that. Let me make sure that this worked. Hey, good. Okay. It did complain because technically we're running a coroutine, and if a game object is
yeah, don't do
disabled,
that,
and so
Bryce.
yeah, I'm not going to do that. Fine, Unity. That's Unity's problem, though, not ours. So I'm just going to choose to ignore that. Okay,
yeah,
so
start up the GroKit audio system. Show it off, Bryce, with the pools.
Oh, pooling audio.
Mm.
Ooh, is there? Okay, fine.
Of course, there is one in the audio system. There's a prefab already set up. You just gotta drag it in.
There's a prefab. I was wondering if there was a grow block.
I don't think we have a grow block for the audio system just yet because there's so many different pieces of audio that you could use.
So, in our modules folder, let me go back up here. So in GroKit modules, we have our GroKit audio. And in that, we have like our GroKit audio manager here. That has a bunch of different stuff already hooked up for you.
Yep, just drag them out and off you go.
And then...
And that just sits there like a little singleton.
Yeah. Uh-oh. Script error or just null reference?
Where?
This. Just says script.
Oh yeah, you can get rid of that.
Okay,
that's,
cool.
It's an old loop. That's a loop source. You're not going to want to do that. You're going to do an FX anyways.
Oh no, I know. I just wanted to show the couple components. There's also the audio spectrum one, but maybe I shouldn't have dragged those out.
Yeah, one at a time.
So I would probably want to. Well, we won't worry about routing necessarily right now. So on our, we could do it on our trigger. We could also do. We could do it on the inward activator and then have this be parented properly. But I'll put it here just so we can kind of see it in isolation.
Outward activator would mean if we change the door type, it'd be good to go. But yes, technically, it should be there.
Yeah. Or, that would be the question, right?
Actually, you know what you should do? No, you should make an empty object and just add it to the inward activators that always runs. That's the better way to do it. Make a new empty object that's door sound.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's what I would do.
I just meant technically you should do it per door, because the double slide door would make like a sound, whereas like the hatch might make like
well,
a
what I'm
clunk.
saying is if you set it there, if you just have door audio, then you could change the door audio to whatever it needs to be.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But yes, if you want to do the switch, there you go. So yeah,
depending on how you wanted to route it, that would go well. And well, here I was just gonna do. Where's my here? So you could just do this and just play your audio clip straight up. We like to use this quack.
Yep. And then that'll just play the audio clip in 2D. Or you can use the FX event. Yeah.
So, oh, I have it muted. Sorry. There it goes. So there we go. So yeah, sorry. So we have our GroKit Audio Manager prefab that you can put into the scene, and then again, it's got a ton of stuff hooked up automatically for you. In this case, the test clip was already slotted in to be our quack test, and then you could just straight up oops, I don't need that. You can just straight up play a clip
Any audio
directly,
clip.
or in here, I think start just works, but you could also just do test audio. Even though it's test, it still will just play it. And because the quack test is what's slotted in as the test clip, when you play this, it'll just play whatever's in there. So because we use the quack, that's what we did.
Yeah, and if you don't want a slot, you could use you should show them the play FX event.
Yes. Let me collapse all this. Well, yeah. So let's do that here. So we'll do door audio, and then FX. Which one did we end up using again?
FXF event. There you go.
Event or bass?
You can use either. Bass is probably the simpler one.
Okay, we'll do bass.
Yep.
So the SFX sound effects, for what that is, we have just some basic options. So play on start if you want it to play automatically, you can. In this case, we don't want it to. We want it to play when the door opens. So we will set that up. So the override clip here will just be whatever we want it to play. So in this case, do we have any other audio other than quack? Just to see. Oh, we do. Okay. We'll do AI tone. Let's see what that one sounds like. So it's not playing on start, AI tone. I'll set it to is2D. That way you don't have to worry about like attenuation or anything like that. Okay. So now we can do this on our inward instead of our outward. So I can just get rid of that from here. And on our inward activator, we can just say when this runs on, we will play our SFX bass. So now if I hit play, and we move our debug object into range. Ooh, I like that.
And you could alter the pitch so it makes a different tone every single time.
No.
You'd have to use the FX event for that one, though, not the
Oh,
bass.
well, what a good segue into the more advanced thing. Let's do that. SFX event. Ooh, look at all these. So I'll drag my AI audio clip back in. Boom. Alter pitch. Look at that. So now I can randomize the pitch. Ugh, the interface. There we go. We'll do something like... That might be too wide of a range. Yeah, we want to exaggerate it. Let's see. Let's try something like that. And then because I changed the component, I just have to put it back. SFX event, play. So let's see what that sounds like. So this is good for, like random pitch is nice for, like footsteps and stuff like that, or machine gun fire. Anything you don't, that's like super repetitive that you don't want to like sound obviously repetitive, is why we have that in there for one of the reasons. Oh.
So that was useful because I have a single AI tone, and I was like,
Yeah.
it needs to have a happy tone and low tone, and I just adjusted the pitch quickly.
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. Well, I mean, so that makes me think of Bambi. Because the April Showers song, when it starts raining and each little raindrop hits the ground and makes a tone. That could be an interesting. Let's see if I can do that super quick. If we had, well, let's do this. We'll make an item ID trigger, and we will make this not a sphere collider, but a box collider, because you just can. You can just do this. Change the collider type all you want, make it a mesh collider, who cares? It all works. And let's make this super flat, so this will be on the ground like that. I'm gonna get rid of these. Well, I'll keep the auto manager, obviously. Hide my doors. Don't need the visual for this. And I'm going to create, well, I don't need to create, this will just be physical object, so I'll just give this, I won't use kinematics, so this should fall. So technically this should fall and still trigger should still trigger. It does. Good. So what that means we can do is we can have this, when it triggers this, just play a sound. Let's get rid of, we don't need the reference here. So when this goes into the trigger, have it play a random sound. So in fact, I can just copy and paste this in here. Pretend this isn't a child object. And there actually already is an audio slot here for enter and exit, but I just wanted to do it this way. Okay, so now every time one of these falls into our item ID trigger, it should play that sound. Let's make sure that works, and then we're just gonna go wild with it. Hey, it works. So now what we can do is we can prefab this, and I'll create an original, and I'll create a prefab variant. Why not? And I'm going to call this falling audio object. I don't know, something like that. I don't know why I renamed it in the scene. It's not going to exist in the scene.
Who knows?
Because we're going to make it empty, and we're going to call this audio object spawner. And then we have a component called a base spawner. In fact, there should be a grow block for this. Continuous object spawner.
There it is.
Who was thinking about it? Okay. Here's a continuous object spawner. Again, inward activator tells the loop timer to start and stop if we don't want it to start automatically. But in this case, I'm going to start it automatically. We're going to use a random interval between, I don't know, 0 and 2. Nah, that might not be. 0 and 0.8. And it's just going to simply tell this to spawn. So if we look through the routing of this, we have an inward activator that tells the timer to start or stop. So if we wanted to, we can control when this turns on. We have a looped timer. We're using a random interval, so it'll pick a random interval every time it's told to go. We're having it loop. And then once it reaches that interval, it's telling our spawner here to spawn an object. Because we haven't given it a position, it'll spawn on itself. And the object that it currently wants to spawn is this gravity object, but we're just going to slot in our falling audio object. And I'm going to raise this up off the ground a little bit. So now what should happen when we hit play, because I told the timer to start automatically, it should spawn an object, it should fall. They're stacking. They're playing it though. Let's do this. Let's now that we know that it collides properly, let's set our item ID trigger. Let's set our falling audio object to be is
Just
trigger.
make them smaller, Bryce.
I'll make them small. Yeah, I should make them smaller too. But I'm just gonna make them is trigger. They really shouldn't have a visual at all. They should have like a really long like rain looking visual. But there we go.
Great.
This is very horrifying sounding, but you get the idea. So that could also be expanded to, when I type spawn, you notice we have this continuous object spawner at points. So you can have an array of points that it's spawning at. So then it's not like all stacked on top of each other. So you could you could have them spawn in different spots. You could also shorten the randomness of the spawner so that it is a little bit more consistent, a little bit more rhythmic. You know, something like 0.6 and 0.8 would still be kind of random, but it wouldn't be like too random, so it wouldn't sound chaotic like it just was. But yeah, so that's that's just, I mean, one of the, I mean, as you saw, just one little thing you can then shoot off in a direction, and we have a lot of components that could probably, if we don't have a component that can do the functionality that you're looking for, just on its own, just reach out to us, like on Discord anytime, especially during the hackathon, but um, at any time on the GroKit Discord or wherever, and propose the functionality, and we will either figure out a way to route it with multiple components based on what we have, or if it's something that doesn't exist, that we would then let you know, so that you don't have to keep hunting for a potential component. But documentation, huge. So if you ever have if you're ever wondering if a component exists or if something does something, first place to look, documentation for sure. If you can't find it there, then just let us know. Um, it probably exists, like I said, in some capacity. It might be multiple components hooked together, but you can get some really complex functionality with just a couple components and a little bit
Yeah.
of time. So,
All right.
but
I
yeah,
think we're
so
good to go,
yeah,
Bryce.
I didn't see a lot of other questions rolling in, so I'm glad that we were able to answer um, the questions that people were having. It was mentioned in the chat that we will be around um, during the hackathon to
Yeah.
answer questions that anyone has as they come up. But yeah, other than that, that's all for the demo. We did go a little bit over, but that was it. Okay, yeah. So if like I said, no other questions, if anyone needs anything, just reach out and let us know. Otherwise, happy hackathon,
Yeah.
everybody. It's exciting.
Good luck, everyone.